The morning sun beat down on Camp Pendleton, California, as Captain Derek Morrison stood outside the main administrative building, coffee in hand. It was a Tuesday in late September, and the 28-year-old Marine officer was feeling good about himself. He'd just been promoted 6 months ago. His unit had scored high marks in their last readiness review, and he was being considered for an early assignment to a prestigious post in Quantico. Derek was talking with two of his fellow officers, Lieutenants Jackson and Rivera, when a small rental car pulled into the visitor parking area. They watched as a woman stepped out, carrying a worn leather bag and wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a simple white button-down shirt, and boots. She looked to be in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her face was tanned, with fine lines around her eyes that suggested she'd spent years squinting into the sun. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Derek called out, not bothering to walk over to her. There was something dismissive in his tone, the way a person might address someone they assumed was lost. The woman looked up at him, her gray eyes calm and assessing. "I'm here for the readiness evaluation," she said simply. Her voice was quiet but clear, with a slight southern accent. Derek exchanged glances with Jackson and Rivera. Both men smirked. The readiness evaluation team wasn't due until next week, and when they did arrive, they'd be in uniform, driving official vehicles, and announcing themselves properly through the chain of command. "The evaluation team isn't scheduled yet," Derek said, his smile patronizing. "Are you sure you're at the right base? Maybe you're looking for the civilian personnel office." The woman didn't react to his condescending tone. She simply pulled out her phone and checked something, then looked back at him. "My orders say I'm in the right place. Building 2251, correct." "That's the operations building," Lieutenant Rivera said, stepping forward. She was a sharp officer, usually more perceptive than the men around her. "Ma'am, are you a contractor? A consultant?" "Something like that," the woman replied. Derek couldn't help himself. Something about this woman's calm demeanor irritated him. She wasn't showing the proper deference, wasn't explaining herself, wasn't asking for his help navigating the base. She acted like she belonged here, and that rubbed him the wrong way. "Well, before you go wandering around a Marine Corps base, maybe you should tell us what your rank is," Derek said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Or do they not teach civilians about the chain of command?" Jackson snorted with laughter. Even Rivera looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. The woman studied Derek for a long moment. Her expression didn't change. No anger, no embarrassment, nothing. It was like looking at still water. "I don't think my rank is relevant to you at this moment, Captain," she said, reading his insignia. "But I appreciate your concern for protocol." She walked past them toward the building, her stride confident and measured. Derek watched her go, shaking his head. "Did she just brush me off?" he said, genuinely surprised. "I think she did," Jackson replied, grinning. "Maybe she's someone's wife, a colonel's spouse checking out the facilities." "Whoever she is, she's got an attitude problem," Derek muttered. "Someone needs to teach her how things work around here." Inside the operations building, the woman approached the main desk, where Sergeant Major Pete Hutchins was reviewing paperwork. Hutchins was a 30-year veteran, a man who'd seen everything the Corps had to offer. When he looked up and saw the woman standing there, his eyes widened slightly. "Ma'am," he said, standing up immediately. His voice carried a respect that hadn't been present in Derek's. "We weren't expecting you until 1400 hours. "My flight got in early," she replied. "I thought I'd take a look around before the official schedule begins." "Of course, ma'am. Should I notify Colonel Patterson?" "Not yet. I'd like to observe the regular routine first. Unannounced inspections reveal more than scheduled ones." Hutchins nodded, understanding immediately. "Will you need an escort?" "No, thank you, Sergeant Major. I know my way around a Marine base." As she walked down the hallway, Hutchins watched her go, then immediately picked up his phone. But before he could dial, he paused. She'd said she wanted to observe the regular routine. He'd honor that, at least for now. But he had a feeling that Captain Morrison and his loose lips were about to learn a hard lesson. The woman spent the next 2 hours walking through various buildings, observing training exercises on the grounds, and sitting quietly in the back of a briefing room where junior officers were being taught tactical communications. She took notes in a small leather journal, her handwriting neat and efficient. At the firing range, she watched as Derek's unit ran through their weapons qualifications. Derek was there supervising his Marines, and he was good at it. She had to admit that. He knew the proper procedures, encouraged his troops, and maintained safety protocols. But there was something in his attitude, a swagger that bordered on arrogance, that concerned her. "Hey," Derek called out when he spotted her standing near the observation area. "This is a restricted training zone. Civilians need authorization to be here." The range master, a gunnery sergeant named Collins, looked over and saw the woman. He'd been at Camp Pendleton for 15 years and had sharp instincts. Something about this woman's bearing, the way she stood, the way her eyes tracked the Marines on the firing line with professional assessment. It told him she wasn't just any civilian. "Captain Morrison, perhaps we should," Collins began. "It's fine, Gunny," Derek interrupted. "I'll handle this." He walked over to the woman, his rifle slung across his chest. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave this area. If you're lost, I can have someone escort you back to the visitor center." "I'm not lost, Captain," she said quietly. "I'm observing, and I have authorization to be anywhere on this base." Derek's jaw tightened. "Then you won't mind showing me that authorization?" The woman looked at him steadily. "Actually, Captain, I do mind. You're not in my chain of command, and I don't answer to you." A few of the nearby Marines had stopped to watch the exchange, sensing drama. Derek felt his face flush. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but this is a United States Marine Corps installation, and I am an officer here. You will show me your credentials, or I will have the military police escort you off this base. Do I make myself clear?" The woman smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Crystal clear, Captain. Tell me, how long have you been an officer?" 6 years, why? "And you've served overseas?" 2 tours, Afghanistan, and a training rotation in Japan." "Commendable," she said, and she seemed to mean it. "Combat experience is valuable. It teaches humility, apparently not always enough of it." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Are you trying to insult me?" "No, Captain, I'm trying to give you a chance." "A chance for what?" "To stop talking." The nearby Marines struggled not to laugh. Even Gunnery Sergeant Collins had to turn away to hide his grin. Derek felt humiliation burn through him, mixing with anger. "That's it," he said. "Gunny, call the MPs. This woman is trespassing and disrupting a training exercise." Collins hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should contact the Sergeant Major first." "I gave you an order, Gunnery Sergeant." Collins reluctantly reached for his radio, but before he could key it, the woman spoke again. "Before you do that, Captain Morrison, let me ask you one more question. When was the last time your unit ran a communication security drill?" Derek blinked, thrown by the sudden change in topic. "What? That's none of your concern." "When was the last time?" she repeated. 3 months ago. We're scheduled for another one next month." The woman wrote something in her notebook. "And your NBC training, nuclear, biological, chemical." "That's classified training information. I'm definitely not discussing operational readiness with a civilian." "Interesting," she said, making another note. "One more question. Your casualty evacuation protocols, are all your personnel certified in tactical combat casualty care?" Derek crossed his arms. "Every Marine is trained in basic combat life-saving. Again, this is not information I'm going to discuss with you." The woman nodded slowly. "I see. Thank you, Captain. You've been very informative." She turned and walked away before Collins could make the radio call. Derek watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of anger and unease. Something about the way she'd asked those questions, the specific nature of them, bothered him. "Sir," Collins said quietly, "I think maybe that woman was." "I don't care who she thinks she is," Derek snapped. "If she shows up at another one of my training sites, you call it in immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir." But as Derek turned back to his Marines and tried to refocus on the qualification exercise, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a serious mistake. The woman's eyes had held something he recognized from his time in combat, the look of someone who'd seen things, done things, survived things that most people couldn't imagine. Later that afternoon, back in his office, Derek was filling out training reports when Lieutenant Rivera knocked on his door. "Come in," he called. Rivera entered, looking uncertain. "Sir, I just heard something strange from one of the admin staff." "What is it?" "That woman from this morning, the one you confronted at the range." "What about her?" Apparently, she signed in at the main gate. Her credentials gave her unrestricted access to the entire base. Command-level clearance. Derek looked up from his paperwork. Command level? That doesn't make sense. She was in civilian clothes, driving a rental car. I know, sir, but Corporal Hayes saw the log. Her credentials were legitimate, very legitimate. A cold feeling started to form in Derek's stomach. Did Hayes see her name? No, sir, but he said the gate guards stood at attention when they processed her, both of them. Derek leaned back in his chair. Gate guards saw hundreds of people every day. They didn't stand at full attention unless someone was either very high-ranking or very important, usually both. Find out who she is, Derek ordered. Quietly, use your contacts in admin. Yes, sir. After Rivera left, Derek sat alone in his office, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. The woman's words echoed in his mind. I'm trying to give you a chance to stop talking. For the first time since his promotion, Captain Derek Morrison wondered if his confidence had finally written a check his career couldn't cash. By the next morning, the mystery woman had become the talk of several units at Camp Pendleton. She'd been seen in various locations around the base: the motor pool, the supply depot, the communications center, even the mess hall during breakfast hours. Each time, she watched, listened, and wrote in her small leather notebook. Derek Morrison heard the reports throughout the day. Lieutenant Jackson mentioned seeing her observing PT exercises at 600. Gunnery Sergeant Collins reported she'd returned to the firing range and watched the afternoon qualification sessions without saying a word. A captain from Delta Company said she'd sat through their entire tactical briefing, invited by their commanding officer, Colonel Patterson himself. That last detail made Derek's blood run cold. If Colonel Patterson had personally invited her to observe a classified tactical briefing, then she wasn't just some random consultant. She was someone important, very important. Derek tried to find out more information, but he hit walls everywhere he turned. The admin staff suddenly became vague and unhelpful. Sergeant Major Hutchins was mysteriously unavailable every time Derek tried to reach him. Even his usual sources among the other officers seemed reluctant to talk about the woman. It was Lieutenant Rivera who finally brought him solid information late Wednesday afternoon. She entered his office and closed the door behind her, her expression serious. "Sir, I found something," she said quietly. Derek looked up from the equipment inventory he'd been reviewing. "About our mystery woman." "Yes, sir, but you're not going to like it." "Just tell me, Rivera." The lieutenant sat down across from him. "She's not a consultant, she's not a contractor, she's active duty." Derek felt his stomach drop. "Active duty what? Army, Navy?" "Marine Corps, sir. She's one of ours." "Rank?" Rivera hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. I couldn't get a straight answer. But I talked to a friend of mine in personnel, someone I went to officer training with. She couldn't give me specifics, but she said the woman's file is flagged at the highest level. The kind of flag that means you don't ask questions." "What kind of officer has a file like that?" "Intelligence, maybe. Special operations. Someone involved in classified programs." Rivera shook her head. "But here's the other thing. My friend said that when she processed the woman's arrival paperwork, she had to get authorization from someone at Henderson Hall." Derek's mouth went dry. Henderson Hall was the Marine Corps headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. It housed the commandant and the highest levels of Marine Corps leadership. You didn't need authorization from Henderson Hall unless you were dealing with someone at the very top of the chain of command. "Did your friend see what she's here for?" Derek asked. "Some kind of evaluation, but not the normal kind. This is personal, direct from headquarters. She's looking at readiness, training protocols, leadership effectiveness, and—" Rivera paused, looking uncomfortable. "And what?" "And command climate. How officers treat subordinates, how they handle authority, professional conduct." Derek felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Command climate evaluation. That meant she was looking at whether officers were leading properly, treating people with respect, maintaining proper military bearing. And he'd been nothing but dismissive and rude to her since the moment she'd arrived. "How bad is this?" he asked quietly. Rivera met his eyes. "Sir, with all due respect, you called the MPs on her. You questioned her authority in front of enlisted Marines. You made jokes about her rank." "I didn't know." "That's not going to matter, sir. What matters is how you conducted yourself toward another Marine, regardless of whether you knew her rank or position. Rivera's voice softened. Captain, you taught me that during my first week under your command. You said that a true officer shows respect to everyone, from the commandant down to the newest private. You said that's what separates good leaders from bad ones. Derek closed his eyes. She was right. Those were his words, his principles, and he'd violated them completely because a woman in civilian clothes had bruised his ego. I need to find her, he said. I need to apologize. I don't think that's going to help at this point, sir. The best thing you can do is make sure your house is in order. If she's evaluating your unit, make sure there's nothing else for her to find wrong. Derek spent the rest of the day in a state of controlled panic. He reviewed every training record, every readiness report, every piece of documentation related to his command. On paper, everything looked good. His unit performed well. His Marines respected him. His efficiency reports were excellent. But he knew that wasn't what this woman was looking for. She was looking at character, at leadership under normal conditions, at how officers behaved when they thought no one important was watching. That evening, Derek stayed late at the office, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Around 1900 hours, there was a knock on his door. Come in, he called. The door opened, and Sergeant Major Hutchins stepped inside. The older man's face was carefully neutral, but Derek could see disappointment in his eyes. Sergeant Major, Derek said, standing, I've been trying to reach you. I know, sir, I've been busy. Hutchins closed the door and remained standing. Captain Morrison, how long have we worked together? 14 months, Sergeant Major. In that time, have I ever steered you wrong? Have I ever given you bad advice? No, Sergeant Major, never. Then why didn't you listen to me yesterday morning, when I tried to signal you to show that woman proper respect? Derek felt his face flush. You knew who she was. I knew she was someone important. I didn't need to know her exact rank or position to know that you should treat her with basic military courtesy. Hutchins finally sat down, and his voice became less formal. Derek, you're a good officer. I've seen you lead Marines in difficult situations. I've seen you make hard calls and stand by your people, but you've got a blind spot. What blind spot? Pride, arrogance. You're young, you're successful, and you've started to believe that your rank means you're always the most important person in the room. That's a dangerous attitude for an officer. I don't think I'm always the most important. Really? Then why did you assume that woman was nobody? Why didn't you offer to help her instead of challenging her? Why did you feel the need to pull rank and threaten her with the MPs? Derek had no answer. Hutchins continued, in the old Corps we had a saying, stay humble or get humbled. You had a chance to stay humble, now you're going to get humbled. Is she going to file a formal complaint? I don't know, that's up to her. But I do know that she's writing a report that will be read by people at the highest levels of our Corps. And whatever she writes about you, about your unit, about this base, it's going to be taken very seriously. Can you tell me who she is, Sergeant Major, please? Hutchins stood up. That's not my place, but I'll tell you this much. That woman has earned more respect in her career than most of us could earn in 3 lifetimes. She's done things that you and I can't talk about, been places that don't exist on any map, and made sacrifices that most people can't imagine. And you treated her like she was an inconvenience. After Hutchins left, Derek sat alone in his office, feeling worse than he'd ever felt in his military career. He thought about calling his mentor, a colonel who'd helped guide his career, but he was too ashamed. He thought about trying to find the woman and apologize, but he suspected that would only make things worse. Instead, he went back to his apartment off base and spent a sleepless night wondering how badly he'd damaged his career. The next morning, Derek arrived at the base at 5:30, earlier than usual. He wanted to check on his Marines, make sure everything was running smoothly, and try to demonstrate, even if the woman wasn't watching, that he was a competent officer who cared about his people. The morning PT session went well. His Marines were in good spirits, performing their exercises with energy and discipline. Derek ran with them, pushing himself hard, trying to clear his mind through physical exertion. After PT, he was walking back to the operations building when he saw a small crowd gathered near the vehicle depot. He walked over to investigate and found several officers and senior enlisted personnel standing in a loose circle, their attention focused on something he couldn't quite see. As he got closer, he heard a voice he recognized. The woman's voice, calm and authoritative. "The problem isn't with the vehicles themselves," she was saying. "The problem is with the maintenance logging system. You're using an outdated protocol that doesn't catch small issues before they become big ones. In a combat situation, that could get people killed." Derek pushed through the crowd and saw her standing next to a Humvee with its hood open, pointing at the engine. Next to her stood Major Richard Chen, the base logistics officer, and several maintenance chiefs. They were all listening to her intently, and Chen was taking notes. "We tried to update the system last year," Chen was saying, "but we didn't have authorization to implement the new software." "I'll make sure you get that authorization," the woman replied. Then she noticed something else in the engine compartment. "This seal here, it's cracked. Did your maintenance inspection catch that?" One of the chiefs, a master sergeant with 25 years of service, leaned in to look. His face went pale. "No, ma'am, we missed that." "Get it replaced today. Check all the vehicles in this depot for the same issue. It's a common failure point in this model year." "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." The woman straightened up and saw Derek standing at the edge of the crowd. For a moment, their eyes met. Derek saw no anger in her expression, no triumph, nothing personal at all. She simply acknowledged his presence with a slight nod and turned back to Major Chen. "I'll need a full inventory of your maintenance equipment by this afternoon," she said. "And I want to meet with your training NCOs tomorrow morning to review their certification records." "Yes, ma'am," Chen replied. "Whatever you need." As the crowd dispersed, Derek found himself standing there, watching the woman walk away with Major Chen, the two of them discussing technical details about vehicle readiness. What struck Derek was how natural it seemed, the way experienced officers deferred to her, the way she spoke with absolute confidence about complex mechanical issues, the way everyone called her ma'am without any hint of condescension. This wasn't just a high-ranking officer doing an inspection. This was someone with deep, practical knowledge, someone who'd been in the field, worked with equipment, understood how things broke down in real-world conditions. Lieutenant Rivera appeared at his elbow. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "Yeah." "She knows her stuff, sir. Like, really knows it. That seal she spotted. I've been around vehicles my whole life. My dad was a mechanic, and I would never have noticed that." Derek nodded slowly. "She's been deployed. Multiple times, I'd guess. You don't get that kind of field knowledge from sitting behind a desk." The rest of the day, Derek kept hearing stories about the woman. She'd identified a safety violation in the ammunition storage facility that had been overlooked for months. She'd corrected a tactical communication procedure that was outdated and potentially dangerous. She'd sat with a group of junior enlisted Marines in the mess hall and listened to their concerns about training schedules. Everything she did demonstrated competence, experience, and genuine care for the welfare of Marines, which made Derek's treatment of her seem even worse in retrospect. That evening, as Derek was preparing to leave for the day, Sergeant Major Hutchins stopped by his office again. "Captain, you're wanted in Colonel Patterson's office at 800 tomorrow morning." Derek's heart sank. Did he say why? "No, sir, but I'd suggest you have your dress uniform ready." After Hutchins left, Derek sat down heavily in his chair. A summons to the colonel's office with instructions to wear dress uniform could only mean one thing. He was about to face formal consequences for his behavior. He thought about his career, about all the work he'd put into becoming a Marine officer, about his dreams of higher command. And he thought about the woman, still nameless to him, still a mystery, whose respect he'd never earned and probably never would. Derek went home and prepared his dress uniform, making sure every detail was perfect. If his career was going to be derailed, at least he'd face it with proper military bearing. What he didn't know was that the next morning would bring revelations that would shake not just his understanding of the situation, but his understanding of what it meant to be a Marine. Derek Morrison slept poorly that night. He kept replaying every interaction with the mystery woman, every dismissive word, every condescending tone. By the time his alarm went off at 500, he felt exhausted and sick to his stomach. He showered, shaved with extra care, and put on his dress uniform. Every ribbon had to be perfectly aligned, every crease razor-sharp. If this was going to be the day his career took a serious hit, he was determined to look like a Marine while it happened. At 7:45, he arrived at the headquarters building and checked in with Colonel Patterson's administrative staff. The corporal at the desk told him to wait in the corridor, which Derek did, standing at parade rest and trying to keep his breathing steady. At precisely 800, the office door opened. But it wasn't Colonel Patterson who appeared, it was Sergeant Major Hutchins. "Captain Morrison, come with me, please," Hutchins said formally. Derek followed him down a different corridor away from Patterson's office, toward the main conference room. His confusion grew. Why were they going to the conference room? Hutchins opened the door and gestured for Derek to enter. Inside, Derek found not just Colonel Patterson, but several other senior officers he recognized. Major Chen, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vance from the Training Division, and Colonel James Bradford from the air station at Miramar. All of them were in dress uniform. And sitting at the head of the conference table, in a Marine Corps dress uniform with more ribbons than Derek had ever seen on one person, was the woman. Derek's eyes went to her shoulder boards first. Birds, full colonel. His stomach dropped through the floor. He'd been mocking and dismissive to a full colonel. His career wasn't just damaged, it was over. But then his eyes tracked to her ribbons, and what he saw there made him forget even his fear for his career. Top center was the pale blue ribbon with 13 white stars that he'd only seen a handful of times in his life, and never in person. The Medal of Honor. The woman who he'd threatened to have removed by military police was a Medal of Honor recipient. Derek felt the blood drain from his face. He stood frozen in the doorway until Hutchins quietly said, "Captain, take a seat." Derek moved mechanically to a chair near the end of the table, his mind reeling. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration, given only for valor in combat above and beyond the call of duty. There were fewer than 70 living recipients across all branches of the military. And he'd asked her what her rank was as a joke. Colonel Patterson cleared his throat. "Captain Morrison, let me introduce Colonel Sarah Mackenzie. Colonel Mackenzie is here conducting a special evaluation for the Marine Corps Combat Development Command. She's been observing operations at Camp Pendleton for the past 3 days." Derek managed to speak, though his voice came out hoarse. "Ma'am, Colonel Mackenzie held up one hand, stopping him. When she spoke, her voice was calm and professional. "Before we begin, Captain Morrison, I want to be clear about something. This meeting is not about your behavior toward me personally. I'm not here to file a complaint or damage your career over a few unfortunate interactions." Derek felt a tiny flicker of hope, but her next words tempered it. "However," she continued, "your conduct over the past 3 days has raised some concerns about leadership approach and professional judgment. Colonel Patterson asked me to address those concerns directly with you, and I agreed. What happens after this conversation is between you and your commanding officer." Colonel Patterson nodded. "Captain, Colonel Mackenzie has requested the opportunity to use this situation as a teaching moment. I think you should listen very carefully to what she has to say." "Yes, sir," Derek managed. Colonel Mackenzie leaned back in her chair, her gray eyes studying him. "Captain Morrison, tell me what you think you did wrong." Derek swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I was disrespectful to a superior officer. I made assumptions based on your appearance rather than—" "Stop," she interrupted. "That's the easy answer. That's you saying what you think I want to hear. I asked what you think you did wrong, really wrong, at the core." Derek thought for a moment, then said quietly, "I forgot that respect isn't about rank. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every person, regardless of who they are or what position they hold." Something shifted in Colonel Mackenzie's expression, not quite approval but acknowledgement. "Better go on." "I let my ego override my judgment. I felt challenged by your confidence, and instead of being professional, I tried to assert dominance. That's not leadership. That's insecurity." Major Chen made a small noise that might have been agreement. Colonel Mackenzie didn't take her eyes off Derek. "When you're deployed in a combat zone, Captain, you don't always know who's who. You might encounter an interpreter wearing civilian clothes who has more tactical knowledge than your entire platoon. You might meet a local national who looks like nobody important but has intelligence that could save your Marines' lives. If you judge everyone by their appearance, by whether they fit your preconceived notions of authority, you'll miss critical information. Worse, you'll alienate potential allies. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes, ma'am." "I don't think you do, not yet." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the base. Let me tell you a story, Captain. 15 years ago, I was a major flying Cobras in Iraq. My call sign was Phantom Viper. Derek's eyes widened. He'd heard the name before, every Marine had. Phantom Viper was legendary. There were stories told in officer training about impossible missions, enemy positions destroyed against overwhelming odds, Marines extracted from situations that should have been death sentences. Colonel Mackenzie continued, her voice distant, remembering. We got a call about a squad pinned down in Ramadi. 12 Marines surrounded, taking heavy fire from 3 positions. They had wounded. They were running out of ammunition. The casualty evacuation birds couldn't get in because of the ground fire. The room was completely silent. Even Colonel Patterson, who probably knew this story, was listening intently. My wingman and I were 20 minutes out. By the time we arrived, the situation had deteriorated. The Marines were down to their last magazines. 2 were KIA, killed in action. 4 more were wounded. The enemy had them surrounded in a partially collapsed building. She turned back to face Derek. Now, Captain, let me ask you a question. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Derek thought carefully. Ma'am, standard doctrine would be to suppress the enemy positions with coordinated fire, create an opening for a ground extraction team. That would take too long. The Marines had maybe 5 minutes before they were overrun. Then, direct attack runs on the enemy positions, danger close to our own people. In an urban environment, with civilians potentially present, and our Marines in a structurally unstable building that could collapse from the concussion of our weapons. Derek had no answer. Every option seemed impossible. Colonel Mackenzie smiled grimly. There was an enemy position on a rooftop, elevated, giving them a direct line of fire into the building where our Marines were trapped. The only way to eliminate that position quickly enough was to bring my helicopter down to their level, match their altitude, and engage them directly. Lieutenant Colonel Vance, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. That's a violation of every safety protocol we have. Attack helicopters don't operate at that altitude in urban combat. You'd be vulnerable to every enemy fighter with a rifle. I know, Colonel Mackenzie said simply, but those were my Marines dying in that building. So I brought my bird down to rooftop level, my co-pilot and I eliminated that enemy position, and while we took fire, a lot of fire, we created enough suppression for the ground extraction team to get in and pull our people out. She pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, and turned it around to show a photograph. Derek saw a group of Marines, dirty and bloodied, standing in front of a helicopter. In the center was a younger version of Colonel Mackenzie, her flight suit torn, a bandage on her head, grinning despite obvious exhaustion. 10 of those 12 Marines made it home because we broke protocol, took in.